In 1977, a man's boat capsized in one of the most remote rivers in Australia. No radio, no supplies, no rescue coming. He survived alone for 2 months, sleeping in trees to stay above the crocodiles below. His name was Rod Ansel. The movie his life inspired made over $300 million. He never saw a cent. By 1999, he was dead. Paul Hogan is 86 now, and what he just admitted about Crocodile Dundee changes how you see the entire film. Scenes have been quietly removed. He approved every cut. But the real shock has nothing to do with what was edited out.
No, I was working out in an oilless place, and I thought I'd see how much I could bench press. And there was no one else in the gym, and I was pressing something about the size of a refrigerator, and I felt this.
Michael J. Crocodile Dundee.
Never safaris.
See those rocks sticking up there? They're standing up there for 600 million years. Still be there when you and I are gone.
The rigor before Crocodile Dundee, before Hollywood, before any of it, Paul Hogan was a rigger on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Not an actor, not a writer. A construction worker who happened to be funny. He wasn't polished or trained. He didn't come from money or connections or an acting school. He was just a bloke from Parramatta who could make people laugh without even trying. He got his first break on a TV talent show called New Faces, where he showed up and cracked jokes like he was talking to mates at the pub. No script, no preparation, just raw charisma. The audience loved him. Producers loved him. And suddenly, this bridge worker had a television career. He partnered with John Cornell, and together they created The Paul Hogan Show, which ran for years and made him one of the most recognizable faces in Australia. Then came the tourism ads. Hogan appeared in a campaign telling Americans to come visit, famously offering to slip an extra shrimp on the barbie for them. The ad was a sensation. Australians never actually called them shrimp. They called them prawns, but it didn't matter. The line stuck, and Hogan became Australia's unofficial ambassador to the world. But he had a bigger idea brewing. Not a blockbuster or an action franchise, just a small film about a regular bloke from the bush who ends up in New York City. The character was based on something Hogan had seen years earlier. A bushman who had appeared on television barefoot and told the country how he'd survived alone in crocodile territory. That bushman's story planted the seed for everything that followed. The film was called Crocodile Dundee. It was made on a budget of about $8.8 million, funded partly through a controversial Australian tax incentive scheme called 10BA. These schemes were designed to encourage investment in local films by offering generous tax deductions. But for many investors, it was more about reducing their tax bill than actually supporting cinema. Some weren't backing the movie because they believed in it. They were chasing write-offs. Nobody expected much from a small Australian film about a bushman in New York. And then the movie came out in 1986 and earned over $300 million worldwide. It was second only to Top Gun at the box office that year. Overnight, it became the most commercially successful Australian film ever released. And Paul Hogan, the rigger from the Harbour Bridge, was suddenly one of the most famous men on the planet. And he gave the world one of the most quoted lines in cinema history. He confirmed he wrote it himself. "That's not a knife. That's a knife." 40 years later, people still say it to him on the street. But the best version of this story comes from Hogan himself. He was at a dinner. Liz Taylor was there. Clint Eastwood walked over to his table, leaned down, picked up Hogan's dinner knife, paused, and said, "How many times have you heard it?" Hogan said, "Yeah." Eastwood replied, "You wrote that line, didn't you?" "Yeah. Serves you right." Real danger, fake crocodiles. Most people watch Crocodile Dundee and assume everything was carefully staged. It wasn't. The crew filmed deep inside Kakadu National Park, one of the wildest and most remote locations in Australia. For weeks, cast and crew lived in run-down huts from an abandoned mining camp. No luxury trailers, no catering tents, just basic shelters surrounded by bushland and real danger. This was 1985. There were no drones, no CGI, no digital safety nets. The crew had to physically get into the water. Cinematographer Mike Atkinson later described it bluntly. The water they filmed in was not safe. Crocodiles could be lurking just beneath the surface, invisible until it was too late. Armed rangers stood watch at all times, scanning for movement. At night, the crew swept torches across the water, looking for the glowing reflection of crocodile eyes. But seeing nothing didn't mean nothing was there. Crocodiles can hold their breath for over an hour and remain completely submerged, invisible to anyone on the surface. The crew knew this. Every time someone stepped into that water, they were gambling. That constant uncertainty became part of the film's DNA. You can almost feel the tension in every outback scene, because, for the people making it, the danger was not a storyline. It was their daily reality for weeks on end. Here's something most people don't know. The terrifying crocodile in the movie wasn't always real. For close-up scenes with actors, the production used a carefully built mechanical model designed to look convincing on camera. You can't throw performers next to a wild saltwater crocodile and hope for the best. But the film also used a real crocodile named Bert, a massive beast captured in Australia's Northern Territory. Bert weighed hundreds of kilograms and was known for his genuinely aggressive and unpredictable temperament. Filmmakers shot Bert separately and blended the footage with the mechanical model for close interactions. The result was seamless. Bert became famous in his own right, living in a crocodile park for decades before dying in 2024 at roughly 90 years old. And then there was the buffalo. Hogan said the hardest animal to work with wasn't the crocodile. It was the buffalo. 2,000 pounds, and it refused to cooperate. The scene took an entire day of just waiting around for the animal to do something usable. They couldn't force it. They couldn't trick it. They just had to sit there in the heat and hope. But that unpredictability gave the outback scenes a raw edge that no script could manufacture. And it's one of the reasons the film felt so real. Because large parts of it actually were. The romance. During filming, something happened that nobody planned for. The chemistry between Paul Hogan and his co-star Linda Kozlowski wasn't acting. It was real. Kozlowski was a trained stage actress from Connecticut who had just landed her breakout film role. Hogan was the driving force behind the entire production. Its writer, its producer, its star. They were very different people, from very different worlds. And as cameras rolled in the Australian outback, and later on the streets of New York, their connection grew in a way neither of them expected. The crew noticed it. The director noticed it. And audiences would eventually notice it too, because what they saw on screen between Mick and Sue wasn't performance. It was real attraction caught on film. There was a problem. Hogan was still married at the time. He had a wife and children back in Australia, a life that was supposed to be solid. But the pull of what was happening on set was stronger. After the film's massive success, he divorced his first wife, Noeline Edwards, and continued the relationship with Kozlowski. It was a scandal in Australia. The press had a field day, but Hogan didn't hide from it. By 1990, they were married. They had a son named Chance. They moved to Los Angeles and built a quiet life away from the spotlight. For years, it looked like the kind of love story Hollywood writes, but rarely lives. Two people who found each other while making something magical, and then somehow kept the magic going in real life. It lasted 23 years. In 2013, Kozlowski filed for divorce. The reason was simple: irreconcilable differences. No scandal, no dramatic blow-up. Just two people who, over time, stopped having anything in common. Reports suggested they had no shared hobbies, no overlapping interests, and those gaps widened year after year until there was nothing left to bridge. They co-parented, they stayed respectful, and they moved on separately. Unlike most Hollywood breakups, theirs didn't end in chaos. But the fairy tale was over. After the fame life, after Crocodile Dundee, didn't unfold the way anyone expected. Instead of chasing constant Hollywood fame, Hogan stepped back. He returned for sequels and smaller projects, including the 2020 film The Very Excellent Mr. Dundee, where he played a version of himself, reflecting on his own legacy. He often joked that he was a one-hit wonder, despite winning a Golden Globe and earning an Oscar nomination for Best Original Screenplay. Then came the storm. Australian authorities launched Operation Wickenby. It was one of the country's largest crackdowns on offshore tax evasion, and Hogan became a target. So did his producer, John Cornell. The allegation, millions earned from the Crocodile Dundee franchise, had been funneled through offshore accounts to dodge taxes. For the Australian public, it was a shocking fall. The man who charmed the world as the lovable bushman was now being investigated for hiding money overseas. The investigation dragged on for nearly a decade. Hogan was publicly accused. His finances were dissected in the press. At one point, he was banned from leaving Australia while the case was active. He fought back hard. He insisted he'd paid plenty of tax. He said the process was destroying his reputation and costing him work. In 2010, the criminal charges were dropped. In 2012, he and the tax office reached a confidential settlement. No admission of guilt. No public details. Then came another twist. Hogan claimed a former financial advisor had stolen tens of millions from offshore accounts linked to his earnings. Whether that's true or not, the full story has never come out. On top of the legal battles, Hogan's body started breaking down. He was diagnosed with retroperitoneal fibrosis. A benign growth had wrapped around his abdominal aorta and pressed on his kidney. The treatment involved steroids, and the side effects were brutal. He lost all his body fat. His muscles shrank. He was left so feeble he couldn't open a jar. In a 2022 interview on A Current Affair, he appeared visibly frail and admitted he was being held together with string. He had a pacemaker fitted. He couldn't put on weight no matter how much he ate. Then came the wheelchair photos. Hogan was spotted being wheeled through Sydney Airport, and fans around the world feared the worst. He later laughed it off, said it was arthritis combined with a knee injury from skateboarding in his 80s. The images went viral, but Hogan, true to form, handled it with dry humor rather than self-pity. His son, Chance, now 27, and the lead singer of a punk band called Rowdy P, has also made headlines for the wrong reasons. He was arrested following a domestic incident at his Los Angeles home and now faces a battery charge. Hogan has been candid about the situation. He called his son actually a hero and expressed real frustration with the tabloid coverage, saying he gets annoyed by what he calls the rags. It's clear that staying in America, close to his son, has been a deliberate choice, even if it keeps him thousands of miles from the country he loves. The man they never paid. Now remember the bushman from the opening? The one whose survival story inspired everything? His name was Rod Ansell. In 1977, his boat capsized in a remote river in Australia's Northern Territory. No radio, no supplies. No one knew where he was. For nearly 2 months, he survived alone. He hunted wild animals with his bare hands and improvised tools. He found water sources in barren terrain that would have killed most people within days. He slept in trees to stay above the saltwater crocodiles that patrolled below. When he was finally rescued after about 7 weeks, gaunt and sun-scorched but alive, his story exploded across Australia. He appeared on national television barefoot, completely out of place in the city, yet totally comfortable in his own skin. Think about that image for a second. A quiet bushman, sun-beaten and calm, sitting in a TV studio surrounded by suits and cameras, as if nothing in the civilized world could rattle him. Australia had never seen anything like it. Paul Hogan saw that interview, and something clicked. He didn't just see a survival story. He saw a character, a man completely shaped by the wild, totally unfamiliar with civilization, but grounded in a way that made everyone around him seem like the strange ones. That calm, unshakable confidence in the face of a world he didn't understand. That was the entire premise of Crocodile Dundee. That idea became Mick Dundee. It was widely acknowledged that Rod Ansell was the inspiration for the character. The parallels were unmistakable. The bushman's calm confidence, his barefoot media appearances, the fish-out-of-water charm. Hogan never denied it. But here's what still bothers people decades later. Rod Ansell never received a single dollar from the film. Not a credit. Not a consulting fee. Not a fraction of a percentage. Nothing. The movie made over $300 million. It launched careers, created a franchise, and reshaped how the entire world saw Australia. The man whose life inspired all of it was left behind. It got worse. Ansell tried to capitalize on his own story by starting a Crocodile Dundee tour. The production company blocked him. He was banned from using the name or profiting from the connection in any way. Think about that. A man's real life, his real survival, was turned into a billion-dollar franchise, and he was legally prevented from even using the name associated with his own experience. After that, his life fell apart. He struggled financially. He tried to make a living as a buffalo hunter and farmer, but couldn't hold things together. He fell into drug use. His personality changed. The quiet, grounded bushman that Australia had loved became someone unrecognizable. In 1999, Rod Ansell's story ended in a violent confrontation with police. He was killed. He was 44 years old. On screen, Mick Dundee is charming, calm, and always in control. In real life, the man who inspired him died broke, forgotten, and desperate. That contrast is the darkest truth behind one of the most beloved movies ever made. And it's the truth that makes everything Hogan said in his recent interview land differently. What Hogan revealed at 86. And that brings us to now. Paul Hogan recently sat down for an interview on the Today Show Australia. And for the first time in this kind of detail, he spoke openly about what's been changed in Crocodile Dundee, what he regrets, and what the film really means to him 40 years later. The interview was candid, funny, and at times surprisingly emotional. Here's what he said. The interviewer asked about the restored version of the film. Hogan confirmed it wasn't just a cosmetic upgrade. It's all been digitally restored, and the soundtrack's been, and the colors are better and everything, he said. Even I look better. But then he got serious. There are added scenes, yeah? The host asked. No, Hogan replied. There's mainly taken out. He acknowledged the debate, people arguing that classic films shouldn't be altered after the fact. But Hogan disagreed. It was about Mick Dundee, who represents the Australian outback, he explained, and a lot of people around the world think he's a typical Australian. You shouldn't be grabbing people. He paused. He did it in all innocence and everything, but it's still wrong. When the interviewer asked why the film resonated so deeply, Hogan kept it simple. I think the credibility of the character. That I was ordinary. I wasn't tall and handsome. I'm a regular-sized ordinary guy. Not pretty, not Chris Hemsworth, but you could relate to him confronting civilization in New York City. He also shared one of his most surreal memories, sitting in a London cinema for the premiere of Crocodile Dundee 2, with Prince Charles on one side and Princess Diana on the other. And they're nudging me when something funny happened, he said. Then he added, with his signature dry humor, "Don't they know I'm a rigger?" When asked about putting Australia on the map, Hogan didn't take the credit. He just said, "I helped." And when asked about his final wishes, Hogan revealed he wants his ashes scattered off Sydney's Harbour Bridge, the same bridge where he once worked as a young rigger before any of this began. Full circle. The shocking truth about Crocodile Dundee isn't just one thing. It's the whole picture. A movie funded through tax loopholes that became the biggest Australian film in history. A romance that bloomed on set and ended after 23 years. An inspiration who was never paid and died in tragedy. A star who spent a decade fighting his own government while his body slowly fell apart. And at the center of it all, a man, now 86, held together with string and a pacemaker, who looked at the most famous thing he ever created and said, "Parts of it are still wrong." Then let them cut it. Most creators would fight that. Hogan didn't. And that says more about who he really is than any movie ever could. 40 years later, the film is still being restored, re-released, and introduced to new audiences who have no idea what went on behind the scenes. Behind every frame is a story most people never hear. A real man who inspired everything and got nothing. A star accused of hiding millions. A body held together with string. A love story that quietly ended. And a bridge rigger who wants his ashes scattered right back where it all started. Here's the question nobody answered at the time, and nobody has answered since. Was the production company protecting their brand? Or did they steal a man's legacy? Pick a side in the comments. And if this is your first time here, subscribe. There's plenty more where this came from.